We have a country where the income inequality that we are experiencing now is the greatest level in the living lifetime of anyone in this room, anyone in this country. You'd have to go back more than 100 years to find this concentration of wealth and power and privilege in the United States of America. And one of the progressives who met that challenge of more than 100 years ago, Theodore Roosevelt, said that in order to have true political democracy, we must have something approaching economic democracy. In other words, the best mechanism that humankind has invented to meet the challenges that are before us. Democracy, which calls forth the genius, the intellect, the talent, the human capital, the experience and perspective of all who live within the United States of America, is only possible when we ensure that everybody has opportunity, everyone sees themselves in the future of this country. And this democracy right now, for the reasons that I gave, is at its most precarious moment. So if we want to meet the challenge, guaranteed, high quality, universal health care for everyone, if we want to make sure that everyone can earn a living wage in the jobs that they work, no matter what they are, but including and maybe especially those school teachers who work just to make ends meet. If we want to make sure that we truly lift up rural America by listening to rural America, if we want to heal the divisions at this incredibly polarized moment in our history, if we want to make sure that we have real justice reform and acknowledge that we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, and it is disproportionately comprised of people of color, and if we want to meet the existential threat of climate change and avoid a hell that we will visit upon our children and their children and every generation that succeeds them, then we must fix this democracy and we must fix this country. It cannot be done by half measures. It's got to be all of us, not just Democrats, not just Republicans, not just rural, not just urban, every single person in this country. And I'm running to serve you as President of the United States of America, of every single state in the United States of America, and every single person in every single one of those states. If we are going to do it, we're going to have to do it together. And I promise you, I will campaign in the way in which I wish to govern. By bringing people together, expecting the absolute best from them, never questioning someone's motivation because of who they voted for the last time for president, never writing somebody off because of how red or blue their county is, taking no one and no vote for granted, showing up and then coming back to Dubuque in every single community that we can to show that we mean it, to hold ourselves accountable to you, to answer your questions and make sure that you can fulfill your promise to this country, this important role that you hold in deciding the next Democratic nominee. So though this is just my third day on the campaign trail, about the way that we are running this race, showing up for everyone, never demeaning or vilifying or trying to diminish our opponents or the other people who are running for the Democratic nomination. Come the summer of 2020, every single one of us, regardless of who you support now or in the future, will be on the same page, behind the same nominee, working together to defeat President Trump. Day one, because we've campaigned to ensure that we bring people together, on day one, ready to enact the kind of change that is necessary if that future for our kids, for everyone's kids, is going to be brighter than the course that they're on today. In listening to the people of Iowa over these last 3 days, listening to the people of Texas over the last 2 years of our campaign in my home state, serving the city of El Paso for 6 years in the United States Congress, I have learned so much from so many. So many of the answers to the questions that we pose or others ask about us are provided in the communities in which we live. Being in Fort Madison on the first day of this campaign and meeting a teacher in a welding shop who says that by age 18 on the day of graduation, his students will have 1 year towards an associate's degree. Working with the excellent school counselors in that school, they'll get the scholarships necessary to go to Burlington and Southeastern Community College, get that second year debt-free, and be able to command a job that pays $30 an hour within their own community, so they can be there where their parents live, raise their kids in the same place that they grew up. In West Burlington, Iowa, I listened to farmers who were able to free themselves from the whims of the commodity market, from foreign markets half a world away, add value to what they grow, create high value, high wage, high skill jobs in their own communities. Here we were in an ethanol plant with 50 jobs there, co-owned by more than 200 members of that community, most of them farmers, able to find a way to ensure that their children stayed in the very community in which they were raised or decided to come back after they had attended college. When we talk about lifting up rural America, let's listen to and learn from and follow the example of rural America and partner with rural America so that we make the most out of the leadership that they have already provided. When I listen to those, especially the very youngest among us, who ask questions about gun safety policy in this country, who ask why more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans will lose their lives this year due to gun violence, a number and a rate not seen in any other developed country on the face of the planet. It begs the question, is there something wrong with us that we must accept? Are we inherently violent or evil or bad? Or is this a human-caused solution, a human-caused problem that asks for a human solution? They are the ones who are demanding that we have change, who suggest that universal background checks will save lives, and who have helped to form the political will so that Congress and the House of Representatives passed universal background checks just in the last couple of weeks. Yes. They are the same young people who are going to ensure that not only do we save more lives through sensible gun legislation, but that we have real criminal justice reform. When they ask, why are those who foisted the opioid epidemic on this country, that lost 70,000 Americans in the last year to drug overdoses, who sold those opioids to prescribers, to doctors, to pharmacists as non-addictive, though they knew otherwise, not facing any accountability, while people for possession of marijuana, a substance that is legal in most states in this country, are arrested. And if we're honest about this problem, though all Americans of all races use marijuana at the same rate, only some Americans of some races are more likely than others to be arrested and serve time, to, upon release from prison, be forced to check a box on any job application showing that they have a conviction, diminishing their opportunity to actually get that job, unable to qualify for student loans to improve their prospects, their productivity, and what they'll be able to do over the course of their lives. Those young people are going to lead us on a path to real justice reform and force us to confront the legacy and the hard truths of slavery, of segregation, and suppression of our fellow Americans in our democracy today. And I'll tell you what, if we will follow the lead of those young people, there is no stopping us. In Texas, up until the 2018 statewide election, we ranked dead last, 50th in voter turnout. Not because we like our democracy any less than the people of Iowa, but because our state legislature had drawn some people out of their congressional district based on their race, based on their country of origin. Don't take my word for it. The courts 4 times in 2017 found this to be the case and mandated that Texas change their gerrymandering process. But not waiting for those changes, the people of Texas took matters into their own hands. When we visited each one of the 254 counties, without regard No importa, we would say, whether you're red, whether you're blue, whether you're rural, whether you're urban, people showed up as well, turned out. Young voter turnout was up 500% from the previous midterm election. And though we lost that election by 2.5 points, 2.6 if you're being precise, some really amazing things happened nonetheless. You saw 2 extraordinary new members of Congress elected in seats long held by Republicans, Colin Allred and Lizzie Panel Fletcher. You saw 17 African American women elected to judicial positions in Harris County, the home of Houston, Texas, literally changing the face of criminal justice reform in that county. The largest city in the state of Texas, the most diverse city in the United States of America. In other words, if we campaign for everyone and go everywhere and bring all Americans into the solutions to our challenges, we can create the greatest opportunity to fulfill this country's promise. There is no task too big for us to meet if we can do it together. Let's fix our democracy, and then we can fix this country, and then we can go on with the huge challenges that face this world, and we can do it together. You all with me on this? I'm grateful to be doing it with you. Grateful to have the chance to run to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. So I'm going to ask anyone who has a question, a comment, a suggestion, an idea to raise their hands. I'll do my best to call on you. I think we're going to have somebody who's going to run a question or two up from the basement so that we can hear from those as well. Yes, ma'am.
Get 2 people from downstairs.
Yes, ma'am.
President Trump doesn't seem to believe much in science, and his latest budget cuts drastically the National Science Foundation budget. Do you have a thought about where you would place emphasis when you become president to science, data-driven decisions?
The question is about science, and it is amazing to me that more than 300 years after the Enlightenment, there are still people marching in the streets of America for science. It is because so many of our elected representatives, and in fact, the President of the United States of America, refuse to listen to and believe the scientists who, beyond the shadow of a doubt, have concluded that climate change is real, it is caused by humankind, and that we still have time, very limited amount of time, 12 years to be precise, to keep this planet from warming another degree Celsius. What are the consequences of his disbelief or his failure to acknowledge science? We are the lone nation in the world that has not signed on to the Paris Climate Accords. And those accords in and of themselves and the goals that they set will not be enough for us to avert some of the worst of the disasters, but they were a big step in the right direction. So you asked what I would do as president. I would ensure that the United States is once again a signatory to that agreement. It is only when we join with the rest of the world that we can help lead the rest of the world. And this is a test that the United States has met before. If you think about this country, emerging from the Great Depression, when the Western democracies faced the existential threat of Nazi Germany, it was the United States of America, those extraordinarily brave men and women who were willing to sacrifice their lives, and by the hundreds of thousands did so, that made this country and this world safe for democracy. We're going to need that kind of marshaling of resources and resolve and ingenuity in this country so that we can do our part and help the world do their part as well. Thank you for the question.
Right here, she's from downstairs.
From downstairs, Miss Flynn.
Yes, I've got more of a challenge than I guess a question. My son has mental illness, and you know, I've heard you on Thursday when you're in Keokuk how you know problems with mental illness, and I just try to keep my son alive. And yes. And there's a shortage of, and this whole country has never really fully funded mental health. There's a shortage of psychiatrists, psychologists, and I was reading on a survey that said half the counties in the United States don't have a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm trying to make this a big issue in this campaign, and I guess I'm telling all of the candidates, all the candidates, come up with some major plan or some way where we can fund mental health, because 1 in 5 people will have that. And people are dying, and there's somebody home tonight probably going to kill themselves because they can't get admitted to a hospital because there aren't any beds for them. So I guess that's kind of a challenge I'm going to ask all the candidates. I want this to be a big issue, because 1 in 5 people, if 1 in 5 people had influenza, we would move heaven and earth to cure that, to treat it, but we're not treating mental illness. So.
Thank you, Ms. Flynn. The question, for those who didn't hear the beginning of it, was about mental health, how we make this a priority, and how we get something done. And to add what you courageously shared with us about your family, all across Texas, we met parents just like yours, sisters and brothers of our fellow Texans, Americans, and human beings, who shared with us that their family member was literally getting arrested on purpose to get mental health care in the county jail. In following the facts, we learned that the county jail system in the state of Texas is the largest provider of mental health care services in the state of Texas. What does that mean? It means that unconscionably, we are consigning our fellow Americans to suffering, and as you pointed out, it's tough to talk about it, but we must confront it, to death, and far too often death by their own hands when their suffering becomes too much. We're also doing this at an extraordinary cost to the United States of America. I believe one night in the Harris County Jail for a mental health care patient who got arrested on purpose, to be fed, to be clothed, to be housed, to be prescribed the psychotropic medications they so desperately need, to perhaps see a social worker or a therapist, was $110 per night. For a fraction of the cost, we can ensure that they had consistent access to a mental health care provider. And not only would we save money in the process, we would now realize that person's potential. Everything they were born to do, the job that they would hold, the taxes that they would pay, the poetry that they would write, the children that they would raise. All that now becomes possible when you're well enough to do it. So let's make sure that when we talk about guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care, we're talking about primary health care, we're talking about mental health care, and we're also talking about, and this is important to say, a woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body. Health care means health care in every way for every single person. Thank you. Thank you for raising this.
Second one from downstairs, right here.
And then we'll go to you,
And then we'll
sir.
go here.
I'd like to thank you for running.
Sorry.
My concern and my question is, this immigration, I really do feel America was built as a place for people for hope and change and prosperity. And I see these people coming from these countries, and they are coming they're desperate. And I hear the children are in cages, and it's like we're numb. What are we going to do about that? I mean, what is your plan to make that more, to help us be more accepting and open to other people?
Thank you. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, great question.
Great question, and thank you for reminding us who we are. There are Americans who can trace their family tree back 10,000 years. There are Americans who can trace their family tree to ancestors who were brought here in bondage, slaves who literally built this country, our opportunity, our wealth, and our success, though they could share in none of it. There are people who came here as refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants from every country in the world. And that's who we are. As my friend and former colleague John Lewis likes to say, each of us came here in a different ship at a different time. But now we're all in the same boat. And that's the source of our strength. I live in El Paso, Texas, one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. 3 million people in Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico, and El Paso, Texas, USA, speaking 2 languages from 2 histories and 2 cultures, joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River, and forming something far greater than the sum of their parts or the number of their people. One of the reasons that El Paso, Texas is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. A quarter of those with whom I live were born in another country. They chose us They were called to the United States of America to do better for themselves and their kids. Yeah, that's for sure. But they were also called to this country because they want to contribute to the greatest place on the planet. And they have. Our strength, our security, our success is premised on being able to continue this, and we lose it at our peril. So for anyone who is concerned about the fact that we apprehended on our southern border 400,000 fellow human beings last year, let me put this in perspective. In the second year of the George W. Bush administration, we apprehended 1.6 million people at our connection with Mexico. And those whom we are apprehending today do not try to flee arrest. In fact, they turn themselves in. Very often, too often, they are kids, the same age as Mitchell or Ulysses, traveling alone 2,000 miles. If they're lucky, they show up with their mom. What, I ask you to ask yourself, would compel you to make a 2,000-mile journey on foot, atop a train known as the Beast or La Bestia, not inside, on a seat, to show up here penniless, not knowing the language, not having any family or connections? Imagine your level of desperation and vulnerability, and then, as the question suggests, imagine at that moment, your child, for whom you literally risked your life, is taken from your arms, is locked up in a cage. You are turned over to the Department of Justice, then to ICE, then deported back to the very country from which you fled in the first place. That is America for as long as that persists and as long as we wait to reunite every single one of those separated families. It's on us now to make sure that we make the most of the opportunity to be there for those who have no other home to which they can return. To those who, when they come here, yes, it will be good for them. It'll be even better for us. Those things they will do in their lives, the genius that they will reveal, will benefit this country, not some other place it always has. We need immigration laws and leadership that reflect our values, our interests, the reality on the ground in places like Dubuque, in places like El Paso, Texas. That's the kind of leadership that I want to provide. Thank you for asking the question.
How will you appeal to people in the country that hear this message and hear big government, which is about 30 to 40% of the country right now?
Yeah. I think it's incumbent on those who believe that government can be a force for good, which can help the American people do things that they would otherwise be unable to do on their own, that can partner with communities all over the country to ensure their success, to follow through on that promise. I'll give you some ideas that I have. When I was in Silverton, Texas, perhaps an overlooked community where statewide candidates before did not show up, I was talking about the fact that half of rural Texas does not have broadband internet. So try getting what you raise and produce out to markets if you can't get online. Try starting a small business or finishing your education. Try finding a date on Tinder if you don't have access to the internet. Very hard to do. And before I could finish, this gentleman stood up and he said, I am old enough to have been in first grade in 1937. When this city, oh, you all right? When this city did not have electricity. But thanks to Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was then a congressman at the time, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and their willingness to partner with us and help us form a cooperative, and the Rural Electrification Administration, I was in first grade able to read by electric light the same way that the kids in Dallas or Chicago or New York or Tokyo or London were able to do. They invested and partnered with us and allowed us to reach our full potential. I think that's a great example of what government does when it's at its best. Investing in one another so we can realize our full potential, so that we're well enough to realize our full potential, so that we are paid well enough so that we're not working a second or third job, so we're helping our kids rise to their full potential. That's what we should be able to do, but we got to follow through on that. And we have so many immediate opportunities. Those I described, or being there for those who fought our country's wars, who are still fighting our country's wars, who come back to a country that has failed to support a VA system, to the point that 20 veterans a day lose their lives by their own hand. 16 of those 20 unable to or unwilling to go to a VA and see that mental health care provider who could literally be the life or death difference for them. By making government institutions like the VA work now, that will build more faith and more buy-in and strengthening the role of government in partnering with our communities. And I want to make sure that we make the most of that opportunity. Thank you. Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thanks.
Right here, but
Hi.
Hi. As president, will you provide the leadership for the Equal Rights Amendment for women in the Constitution?
Yes. One more state.
The question is, what will I support the ERA and amend the Constitution to ensure that women are paid and treated commensurate with men in this country, something that we have failed to do in our 243-year history. The answer is, if we are unable to do this legislatively, we're unable to do this in any other way, then yes, we must amend the Constitution to absolutely guarantee it, the same way that we have amended the Constitution in the past to guarantee the full civil rights of all Americans. So thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Beto, you want to share our Guinness together?
Oh, thank you. I can't. I'm not drinking right now.
Okay, all right.
I work, and I'm lucky enough to work for the Northeast Iowa Small Business Development Center. So we cover Dubuque and 8 counties on this side of the state. I get to work with entrepreneurs. It's really a great job. I'd like to hear some practical experience from what you've been able to bring to that question. How do we get more entrepreneurs to get really more successful?
Right. Great question about entrepreneurship and small business ownership. In 1999, with some good friends, I started a small business in El Paso, Texas. Initially web design, then online software, high skill, high tech, high wage jobs in a community that didn't have many of those. Very fortunate to be able to work with some really smart, amazing people who offered a lot of value to our clients, but also grateful that I now have the experience of meeting that payroll week in, week out, of never being off the clock, because anytime that one of my clients or customers needed me, I needed to be there. As we have concentrated power and wealth in this country, as corporations have gotten bigger, as they have purchased elections and legislation, in part thanks to Citizens United, which says that money is speech, corporations are people, and therefore corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money affecting the democratic process. The dynamism of our economy and the rate of small business startups has suffered and declined. If you go back to World War II, nearly half of returning GIs started a small business. If you look at nearly 20 years since 9/11, the rate of small business startup by returning service members from Iraq and Afghanistan is 4%. And there's something missing in our economy. And the only way to fix this is to make sure the economy works for everyone. I go back to that TR quote. We won't get true political democracy until we have something approaching economic democracy. So in this campaign, I have chosen not to take any money from any political action committee or PAC. All the time. Because those corporations and those PACs and those special interests have effectively and functionally corrupted and captured our government. No longer serves and represents the will or the genius of the American people. When we break up that power, we return more of it back to people. We'll see more small business ownership, more vitality in our communities, urban and small counties alike. So I want to make sure that is our goal and that we have policies that follow that. Thank you.
oh, you answered the question.
I got a question.
So-
Let's throw that mic in.
We're gonna, right here is gonna be our last question.
Okay.
Okay, great. Just first of all, just thank you for your courage and for your energy. We need that. My friend and I flew out from San Francisco yesterday just for this.
Really?
We're going back tomorrow, and we just hope you'll keep up the energy, and we're here to support you and to support all Democratic candidates. My question is, how can we ensure that all Democratic candidates stay together, that we find what's more common between us instead of attacking each other? How can we concentrate What's your message to all the other candidates about how we can concentrate to defeat President Trump?
Yeah, thank you. What a great question, and what a great attitude with which to approach the choice that we are all going to make about who our nominee will be. We were at a meeting earlier today in Independence, Iowa, and someone stood up and they said, I sure hope Vice President Biden doesn't get in the race. I don't think he's a great guy, but I just don't think he's right for this moment. And this was a point on which I and the person who made the statement disagreed. I think we'd be very lucky to have Vice President Biden in this race. I think he has a lot of perspective and experience to bring to bear on these problems. I think we are very lucky to have the other 13 contenders in this race. The diversity of experience and skills and expertise and perspective that they bring to this race is to the benefit of all of us. And if we can have this contest respectfully, civilly, by honoring our democracy, I think we will be all the stronger for it. So I can't tell anyone else what to do. I can only control my own actions. You will not see us demeaning any of the other candidates, ever uttering a personal word about anyone else. We are going to compete on our ambitions and our aspirations, the policies that we want to enact that will allow this country to reach its full potential. I hope that we remember, and I said this earlier, that by 2020 summer on the convention, we're all going to be on the same page, the same team, behind the same candidate. Let's do nothing that would compromise our ability to leave that convention as strong as possible, because the goal is not only to defeat President Trump. The much larger goal is to be able to enact this ambitious agenda that we all have for the future of this country. In closing, let me say this. Before we get back in that Dodge Grand Caravan and drive to Madison, Wisconsin tonight. These 3 days that we have spent in Iowa, beginning in Keokuk and ending here in Dubuque tonight, have been one of the most powerful experiences of my life. I've seen so much kindness, so much goodness, so much intelligence that has come forward from meetings like these. I guarantee you, though I'm only 3 days in, it has made me such a better candidate than when I started. I will take your stories and your questions, your constructive criticism to heart and try to be better yet still. I love the fact that we get to do this together. I love that before we're Iowans or Texans, Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans, we're human beings, and we're going to treat each other accordingly. Thank you for having us.